Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. As you all have seen in the media advisory, today we're going to brief you about two major things. The AUC, the African Union Commission, last week has launched the Continental Result Framework, a tool to streamline the implementation of women, peace and security agenda in Africa. The document has been prepared by the Office of the Special Envoy. Next to me is Madame Bineta Diop, the Special Envoy of the African Union Commission on Women, Peace and Security. The Special Envoy will brief you on the status of Women, Peace, Security Agenda implementation in Africa, and of course about the Continental Result Framework and major milestones of the office work. Next to the Special Envoy is Helen Casey Noah, a steering committee member of the Gender is My Agenda campaign. Gender is My Agenda campaign is a network of 55 civil society organizations from all over Africa, working towards the African women empowerment in general, supporting and tabling women agenda to influence the decisions of the heads of state in every continental summits. So this year the pre-summit conference GMAC has taken place last week, and it has tabled 18 points of recommendation. Madame Helen will brief you on this year's major recommendations that GMAC has tabled to the heads of state. Thank you again. I'll leave the floor for the Special Envoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the work of the Office of the Special Envoy. And you might ask why I'm doing this press conference with the GMAC. As I always say, my office is echoing the voice of the women of Africa, but in particular on women that are in conflict zone. So we use the opportunity of having almost 300 women's organizations during GMAC. These are our constituency to launch the Continental Result Framework on Women, Peace and Security. It was adopted by the Peace and Security Council, you may recall. So the instrument became an instrument of Africa. So let me again tell you why we have the Continental Result Framework. When I started this work at the AU, a lot of instruments have been adopted before. Either it is the Maputo Protocol, which is a protocol on women's human rights, called Maputo Protocol, or the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa. All of these policies and programs have issues of women, peace, and security, which we call 1325 in the UN language. 1325. It's a resolution of Security Council. So we decided that looking into those resolutions, that what is needed is the implementation. And if we need to look at implementation, we might also have to go down and start collecting data. So that's why we started putting in place with member states. Now we have 23 member states that have adopted National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. Half of the continent, but you will continue to work hard with member states for them to adopt National Action Plan, because it's once they have a plan with the indicators that we have put in place with them that we are able to monitor the progress on women, peace, and security. What does it mean? It means that when we are deploying our troops, We know if member states who are responsible of the code of conduct have trained the troops on gender equality and how they do with civilian population, in particular the women and the young people. So those are some of the indicators with it. And how many female soldiers have we deployed during in the contributing troop that we send to the field. It's also about how when we have peace negotiation right now, we just see the signing of the accord when it comes to Central African Republic. Were women part of the negotiation? How many were there? And the issues of gender was in place in the accord or not, or the human rights or the women's human right. What kind of issue that address children, the issue of children and women are part and parcel of that agenda. We have to raise that. That's why we need women in peace and security. We look at early warning process as well, because you see that right now, when you look at in governance structure, how many countries have women in the parliament who can vote law to protect women's rights? So those are the indicators that we have put in place, including the fourth pillar, which is the post-conflict reconstruction, because we tend to resolve some of the conflict, but we don't give the resource, the necessary resource for peace building, and that's why we see most of the time that conflict never disappeared in some zone, even though there are peace agreement. So post-conflict reconstruction with a gender perspective is also necessary. So I think that is why this result framework is very important. We are putting in place the first report of the continent. When I started my mandate, we had 16 member states that adopted action plan. So we engage with our government, and now, as I said, we have 23. It's always good to measure progress, and we hope that by 2020, where we say silencing the gun, at least we will have half of the continent who would have the plan of action that are implementing. We also support the regional economic communities that have to adopt a regional approach, like the IGAD, like the ECOWAS, West Africa region, and other regions to adopt that approach. Because when you found that maybe all countries don't have national action plan, but if the region had a regional action plan, you are able to measure the progress through the region. So I stopped there for, I know that there was a distribution of the result framework in the room. I don't, I see my chief of staff. Have we distributed it? Yes, please. So open to question, and on that I wait for an interactive dialogue with you. Thank you. Thank you, Samrawit.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Diop. So this week is about women. This conference is about women, and Helen will give us a brief overview of the GMAC and this year's focus points. And we'll have a question and answer after Helen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From February 3rd to 4th, the members of the GMAC held the 33rd section of the Gender is My Gender campaign here in Addis Ababa. And our theme this year was on towards gender-responsive, durable solutions to forced displacement. And in this theme, we do acknowledge our diversity as women and common objectives that we have of advancing gender equality and human rights of African girls and women. We do meet every year, every time the heads of state are meeting, and our objective is to mainstream gender into any thematic area that the African Union is focusing on. This year, we met more than 250 of us from across Africa, representing different organizations, including civil society organizations, UN agencies, African Union Commission, governments from the different states, and partners around the world. What we came up with, and I'm just going to pick a few of them, is one, we do recognize and formalize. We do call on the African Union heads of states to recognize and formalize the role of the Gender is My Agenda campaign as a major stakeholder in the implementation of gender equality and women empowerment programs and initiatives within Agenda 2063. We want the heads of state to make it possible for women to occupy central leadership positions in decision-making and the management of programs of internal displaced persons and refugee camps, which must include the financing of women-specific needs. We call on the governments in Africa to set up a Women's Rights Commission as a separate entity from existing National Human Rights Commission, who, from our experience, are not taking up the advancing the rights of women in all areas, including refugees and IDPs. To consider the convening of a special section of heads of states on acceleration of political participation of women with focus on strong interventions and legislative support that will eliminate all barriers and create well-resourced and gender-sensitive political and electoral processes for effective participation of all women, including those in refugee and IDP camps. We call on them to adopt policies and measures that prioritize comprehensive gender-responsive local and national refugee frameworks and develop gender-responsive sector plans that address empowerment mechanisms for refugees, internally displaced persons, and returnees, as well as trafficked women, with active involvement and support of the countries that serve as source, route, and recipients. Increase public investment in provisioning of gender-responsive services in IDP and refugee settlements and informal displacement in urban rural areas, with specific focus on key services such as water and sanitation facilities, quality education and childcare services, complemented with long-term efforts of addressing women's rights to housing, land, and property. And also put in place an annual peer review mechanism to review and track compliance on requisite legal and medical responses to address the situation of displaced women and girls. This mechanism should be open to civil society actors. Invest in education technology for refugee, IDP, and returnee children who find themselves vulnerable to risk such as child labor, sexual exploitation, physical abuse, and early marriage and pregnancies. To strengthen the practical actions and accountability for survivors of conflicts, refugees, IDPs, and victims of displacement, and ensure they have access to integrated package of sexual and reproductive health interventions and information. Provide gender-sensitive support to IDPs, refugees, and forced displaced people by putting in their security and defense forces gender equity and equality policies, coupled with tailored capacity building and training program in collaboration with African Centers of Excellencies and program partners. And finally, to adopt processes, practices, and structures to mitigate climate change and moderate potential damages associated with climate change-related displacement, including robust social protection schemes and support to build the resilience of displaced women, pastoralists, and farmers. The other points, as you'll find in the folder that we have shared with you. And I'm willing to take any questions if you want to add. But I would also like to add, based on what the special envoy has said, that members of the Gender is My Agenda campaign have also been part and parcel of developing the Continental Result Framework. We were consulted, we participated in identifying the indicators, but also in providing from our own perspective as civil society organizations what we see that governments are doing and how best the Continental Result Framework can contribute to monitoring women, peace and security issues, both at country level and at continental level. Thank you.
Just to add that you could see that civil society, especially on the gender agenda, are contributing to the debate. You could see actually why they are here. Every time that AU meet, they not just come and criticize, but they discuss the issue and they contribute to the theme of the year, including what will be themselves their obligation vis-a-vis those issues. They have been the one to ask for parity. You have seen that the AU have 50-50 commissioner, and they continue to demand that there are more women in this commission and the organ of the commission. They also were the one to ask for many instruments, as I said, the Maputo, the Solemn Declaration. They were the one to ask for my mandate, African women, to say we need a special envoy for women, peace, and security. Until I was appointed, they were the one to ask for the appointment of a special envoy on youth. And now we have a special envoy on youth. So it means that they are contributing to the debate and demanding, but also monitoring the implementation of women, peace, and security. So just to add on that.
I would also want to add, I want all of you to pay attention that African Union is the first regional organization to appoint special envoy for women, peace, and security. And it's also a leading continent in a number of countries that have adopted a national action plan for the implementation of women, peace, and security. But we're still saying we need more. So if translation services are available, if sorry we didn't.
English is channel 1, French channel 2.
The floor for all of you to ask questions to the special envoy and to the GMAC representative. Would you please say where you're from?
Hello. So my name is Duke. I work for CTFM and TV in Ghana. The envoy, special envoy, made mention of the fact that key to the agenda or they are pushing is to get many more women in leadership, especially in parliament. She mentioned that. And it's a proven fact that when you have women leaders in areas such as that, they help to push the agenda and get gender issues much more mainstream. My question is, what are the specific interventions from your outfit with regards to getting many more women in leadership and helping women get to the top so that they can push the general issues that we are talking about here? Thank you.
Yes, please. Mike.
Hi, my name is Kristen Roby, West Africa correspondent for DevEx. In relation, going back to your comment about the peace accord in Central African Republic, you said that you were not involved as the special envoy on women, peace, and security. Why? And in the future, going forward, how will you ensure that this voice is heard or that you are included in the discussions leading up to a peace agreement?
I'll give the floor to Madame Diop.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for these two questions that are very pertinent. The first one, as I said, is we need women at the right place, men and women. The parity is not just numbers, but we know that women can contribute in the developmental agenda. And that's why we need their talents, we need their experience, and we know that more and more women are educated, especially in the continent. So they have the knowledge and the know-how. So what are we doing within the African Union Commission? As I said, there is a target to have 50-50 in the recruitment. And I think Musa Faki have said it very clear that most of the coming recruitment will be for women. That is what the AU and the organ are doing to implement. It's a commitment of the head of state. We have a gender champion. The president of Ghana is really the champion and report on the progress that have been made at several levels. You know that when you look at some parliament, Rwanda is always the reference that we highlight, but there are other countries. We have seen what Ethiopia is doing because they understood that in the transformation of the country, the women should be part and parcel of the process. So there are many other. I can quote my country, Senegal. We have more than 40% of women in our parliament, but it's not enough. We cannot quote just 10 countries that are on top in the world. We have to have at least the half of the African country to have 50-50 and have a target that we get parity in all our countries. It become part of. So what have we done as well is the African women have built a platform supported by Musa Faki Mohammed and also the United Nations. Yesterday, Secretary General Guterres mentioned in his report, he mentioned 2 networks that are great, and I will link them. The second one will be in your response because it's called FemWise, Women in Mediation. But he also mentioned Africa Women Leaders Network. That network has been established as a platform for African women. And when we say leaders, it's not just when we imagine what is leaders. It has many definitions. Leaders as young, leaders at the grassroots level as rural women, and leaders in all spheres of life. That's what we call about leaders. But leaders who contribute to the transformation of Africa. That's what the definition of leader, that you participate and you contribute in a meaningful way to this Africa that we say Africa is rising and we want the African to rise. So each one of us have to contribute to that. So that's why we create the Africa Women Leaders Network, which have 5 pillars. That 5 pillars, the first pillar is to make sure that we have resources, the finance for women in the continent. Not just taping at the traditional bank. We don't give lend money to women. In some countries it exists, women bank, because they have to be friendly, like we're doing affirmative action. 50-50 or 30% of women in parliament. So we need to have banks, fund that can really lend to women with all the specificity, because we don't have land, we don't have title, but we can. When you look at in the finance sector, we know that the women pay back. So that's the reality. So we need to have a friendly fund for women, and that's why we are launching under the leadership of ECA. The executive director of ECA is launching $1 billion and started with $500 million, $1 billion fund for women in Africa, but managed by fund managers. Because what we found that are very, we have gap challenges is that we don't have leaders, African women leaders in finance. You might have African women leaders in politics, you might have them in NGOs, civil society, but how many women bankers we have? So we need to transform, have an ecosystem whereby we give more skills to women on Africa who can manage fund, who can understand the issue of women and lend to the women. So that is what that ecosystem in finance that we are trying to build when we talk about now giving access to women in finance. The other pillar is, I said, women, peace and security. I not come back to it because it's a whole ecosystem we are building for women that are in conflict zone. The other one is the young people. We cannot talk about leadership if we don't have that intergenerational dialogue ourselves and the young people of women of Africa and the young men of Africa, because we need to transmit this agenda of gender to the generation, this generation, not just the next, this generation, for them to be able also to understand why we are fighting for women's human rights. The fourth pillar is women in agriculture. For the women farmers, we say we retire the hoe to the museum. This was one of the slogans of the AU to say that we don't want women with the hoe, you know, that we always show in pictures. We want mechanic for women, mechanization of agriculture, and that is one of the projects which we discussed 5 days ago. IWA, Empower Women in Agriculture, is one of the initiatives, but we need to see the Malabo that give land to the women. We need to see that Malabo applicable right now by our head of state. So we monitor, and I think lastly is the political participation. Building, and why we don't have right now in this room the big hole, a women president. The only we have is Ethiopia, but she is not the acting president, as we could say. But at least we have one. But we don't have in the picture. I was looking this morning, the picture in CNN and all the media, the picture of the AU, and we don't have anybody. So I look at it, I said that we are going, you know, backward. We had Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, but who is going to replace? Thank God at the ministerial level, we still have ministers of foreign affairs, women, a lot of them are in the room. Ambassadors here, female ambassador, very effective. So I think we need to make sure that we build the ecosystem to have more women head of state in Africa, because then they have the, you know, I remember in Liberia, Ellen Johnson went to a school and were asking to a young boy, what do you want to be? Because he was born and only find Ellen president. So the boy looked at her and say, I want to be vice president. Because the vice president was the man. So for him, he cannot be a president because he has to be vice president because it was Ellen who was the president and as a female. So we need to change the mindset to make sure that we see them so it becomes part and parcel of our life, and say women can be president, women can be, your daughter can be the lead in that school, but all not at the university, can go and get to the moon, can do all what men can do. And I think that is the equitable society that we are fighting for, men and women, because it's not a women issue, it's a societal issue. We need all to fight for the same cause because we want the development and the transformation. Unfortunately, sometimes it's more power because the resources are concentrated on the power. So people fight and don't want women to come because men are already fighting on the resources. So if we add on women, it will be more another fight. And I think the power, if we decentralize that power, maybe men will allow women. So the battle is not about women, it's about society. So thank you.
So,
thank them.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. As you've noticed, we are here with the Special Envoy and Civil Society Representative, GMAC. And of course, you've heard about the support the African Women Leaders Network has got from the UN. So we have UN, AU, CSOs, and thank you so much.
So now maybe on the Bangui, it's very important that we'll say, I was part and parcel of the negotiation, not this last negotiation, but I attended the Bangui dialogue. And you remember that Samba Panza was the interim president in Central African Republic. She conducted the, you know, what happened like in Liberia in many places, when there is conflict, they call on the women. The men made a mess and the women have to pick up the pieces. That's what happened in Bangui. Now, but still, we are talking about the accord, and the accord have been signed. I was not there personally, but there was women that have been invited from the church, from the civil society. Not enough. Not enough, because I think that what we are saying is women have to be there, invited as a group, but also come with their own agenda that can put at the table. And that's why FemWise exists. That's why we say the women have been enough trained by the AU or IGAD or any regional body that are able to deploy them when they are peace accord. We don't want to see peace accord where the issue of women and children, either it is in demobilization or in reintegration of child soldiers. All these issues are societal issues. And sometimes the accord is about sharing power. You know, so we want this issue be also part, because when we look at implementation, it's important we look at this. Women are victims in I can tell you, I have been there supporting the women of Bangui from Muslim to Christian. We came together, we went to visit mosque together. We went to visit the church together. We went to even the areas where they are killing every day. That day we were going, they said, don't go. The kilometer for 5 or 4 kilometers something. We went there, but they told us don't go because last night they were shooting. But we went together as Muslim and Christian women. They were singing, they were hugging. We went, and there was women that were already embarked in the two sides, fighting and killing. We even saw women who told us that we were part and we killed other people. So you could see that they coming together, reconciling, but also talking about how together they can motivate the others to join forces, especially with the young people. So we went there, they went to the church, they discussed, we went to the mosque, together they made the praying, and we came back. We create an umbrella organization between the maybe not enough. What we need to do is to make sure that in the implementation, we have women voices in this. So that's what I can say. I was not in this one, but I followed the process in Bangui and other places as well. In DRC, I do solidarity mission. Recently, my last mission last year was that with Amina Mohammed, we visited Niger, which is the Lake Chad Basin and the Sahel region, the two, the Chad and the Niger. We went also to South Sudan. The year before, we visited also northern Nigeria. Went to meet the Chibok girls that are now going back to schools and studying. We went also to Chad, yes, DR Congo as well. So this is going underground, meeting the women, but discussing also with our government, but also those who are implementing project, questioning them on the relevance, on the impact of the project that they have on the ground. So this is the interactive that AWLIN, Africa Women Leaders, are doing on the ground, and my office is part of it to make sure that we are also accountable. You know, that because we got the mandate from the women, but we should not sit in Addis Ababa, but go down, talk to the women, and help them to have an agenda of transformation, and of course, plead to the leaders so they can help them to implement their agenda. And again, I wanted to salute the effort of GMAC members. They are here. Can you wave your hand, GMAC members here? GMAC, who are part of GMAC. So yeah, so they're doing great because they haven't missed one AU summit since they exist. Since the formation of GMAC was in 2000, what year was it again? 2009. So you see, now you are 33 GMAC, yeah, twice a year. Yes. Yeah. 15 years. Yeah, 15. More than 15 years you have been following the work of the AU.
My name is Chris, and I'm from Impuntusem from Ghana, and we're streaming this live because it's important to us that these things actually reach the people who actually it concerns. And so as we're streaming, we actually put it out there that people can ask questions. And one person, that's Tando Makubaza from Zimbabwe, yes, actually asked that what mechanisms are in place to urge heads of states that are not amongst the 23 that have adopted this action plan. So I'm asking this question on behalf of this lady from Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, and salute the women of Zimbabwe. We have been in solidarity mission with Zimbabwe before, and I think GMAC have discussed to go back to Zimbabwe to be in solidarity still in the women for their struggle while they are transforming the political landscape of Zimbabwe. They need support to have the dialogue, to bridge the gap among them, and it has been discussed within GMAC. We have a strong delegation of Zimbabwe who came to GMAC as well. So in my office, what we do is that we enter into interactive dialogue with Peace and Security Council. Because when you start naming and shaming, my report to them, as I said, when I said 16 countries are, those who don't have start looking at it. Because some of them will say, I am not in conflict, I don't need a peace and security national action plan because I'm not in conflict. But when you started the dialogue by telling them, are you sending troops? Oh yes. Do you send support to South Sudan? Do you do to Somalia? Do you? So they start saying, oh my God, so it concerned me. So I started looking into how maybe that pillar, because they, as I said, 4 pillars of 1325, you say, okay, so if I send troops, I need to make sure that I have a plan to train those people I'm sending in the field. In the SADC country, they were telling, oh, we are not in war. But now the region as SADC adopted a regional action plan, and we are supporting country like Namibia to put in place national action plan. They are not on war at all. So many countries have come, but you need to have a dialogue with them. Some people will say, oh, because we need early warning. Our elections are very violent sometimes. And also take the young people in the street that have been used to be violent, the force with the politicians. So what we say is you need, for example, to have preventive measure whereby the women will be watching what is happening during election. Interactive dialogue with the youth. Don't enter into this. You know, you have your card, your vote. Make a difference in there, the ballot, but don't make the difference by burning, etc. So those are the early warning, early system. So now when you start talking about each pillar, people realize that I need a national action plan. So that's why we are sensitizing ourselves. We bring women, civil society here, so when they go back, they are able to advocate for their country to have national action plan. Because if there is conflict, they will be the first one to be victims and their children. So that's how we engage with civil society. We always say 1325 is a women instrument, but it's a society instrument. Men have to appeal for it, but my office is facilitating. We are also building the capacity of our member states. For example, we bring the military here in Addis together with the civil society and the government to have that conversation. So when they go back, they can engage. That's why now we have 23. It's not enough. It's just a beginning, but my office is pushing for more plan of action.
Thank you so much for very interesting, interactive, and critical questions you've raised. And at last, we've talked about dialogue. Media is the tool, and besides the general message we've passed, this is a call for you all media people. Our office, the Special Envoy's office, have a network of reporters We've had trainings before for reporters, journalists, and we have a manual we've developed on gender responsive reporting. You can all have access to it on on internet, and please join our network and let's push the dialogue together further. Thank you so much.
Thank you for facilitating, Madam Media.
Thank you. Thank you.